are here to talk about Titanic 666, and we have a bit to talk about with this film. It's directed by Nick Lyon and was produced by the Asylum. Now, in case you don't know, although I'm sure most of you do, the Asylum is an American production company that makes very cheap movies, more often than not, mockbusters. Now, these are films that are produced to have some similarity to modern mainstream blockbusters, to kind of come out around the same time. So unwary customers will pick these films up thinking that they are something to do with the mainstream movie. Of course they're not. They're very cheap movies and, you know, tend to be not of high quality. Let's just kind of say that. That being said, they do occasionally make an original film which is not really tied to any type of mainstream film. And there's even a handful of movies that I've legitimately quite liked. Now, the Asylum made a movie called Titanic II to coincide with, I think, the anniversary of the Titanic. And this one, Titanic 666, must be in universe of that one because the ship in this one is actually called the Titanic III. So we can imagine that they all take place in the same universe. Now, if that seems distasteful, I think the Asylum know this because they keep making reference to how cashing on the Titanic is distasteful. So they probably got a little bit of flack from that Titanic 2 movie. Now, before we go into the plot, I actually want to talk briefly about the cast of this movie because some interesting kind of things have happened to some of the cast members here in recent kind of months, since I've been filming this anyway. But we do have a few recognisable names here. Heading up the cast, you've got Jamie Bamber, who you may know from the remake of Battlestar Galactica. You've also got Keisha Sharp, who I most notably know from her role in the TV version of Lethal Weapon, and Lydia Hurst, who is primarily known as a model, I believe. But there's two cast members here that in recent months, since I've been doing this video in 2022, have actually courted controversy in some ways. First of all, you have Annalyn McCord, who I actually really enjoyed in the movie 68 Kill, I have to say. But she was the person, and you may have seen this on the news, that decided they were going to kind of do this prose, this poetry to Vladimir Putin, where she declared that if she was Vladimir Putin's mother, how different life would be. And this, of course, became quite a viral thing for about 5 minutes, and it's probably the most high-profile thing that Annalyn McCord's actually ever done. But it was kind of embarrassing for everyone involved. You've also got Joseph Gatt, who I think prior to this you probably most recognised for his role in Game of Thrones, one of the kind of the Fens, I believe it was. I should point out that Gatt has been arrested for a alleged offence but has yet to be convicted, so at the moment it is of course innocent until proven guilty, but obviously the allegation is there at the very least. So there's your cast, not without its controversy. I'm sure the not the best pleased of the producers of this movie with that one. Anyway, let's finally talk about the plot of this one. So this obviously is about the Titanic, or at least the third incarnation of this ship that is going on this, this cruise, and it's going to visit the site of the original Titanic disaster. And we have a variety of people on board, including social media influencers. We've got this kind of professor who is collecting all kind of like paraphernalia from the original Titanic, and we've also got a stowaway played by Hurst. Now, she is a descendant from a victim of the original Titanic disaster, and she's not best pleased that people are kind of profiteering from what she deems her family's legacy. And whilst they're at this kind of the site of making their way to the kind of the site of the original Titanic sinking, she's doing some type of occult ritual to bring about all the spirits of the people who lost their lives in the obviously real life disaster. And these ghosts soon come to terrorise the passengers and the crew of the Titanic III. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. Right then, so let's talk Titanic 666. Now, as I've mentioned, the Asylum do cheap movies, and this movie is cheap, but, and you're going to hear me probably say this a lot in this review, for an Asylum movie, for an Asylum movie, it's actually a little better and a little bit higher production, at least it feels like it, than I would say the majority of Asylum productions. And actually I think, and again, for an Asylum picture, it comes across as being a little bit better in a lot of aspects. So, first of all, at the cast, there is a few recognisable names here, but we also, on top of that, we have a fairly large cast of kind of, smaller roles and kind of, extras and things like this. That the Asylum tend to kind of keep their budgets very low. So you don't tend to have like big casts and things like that. Again, less people need paying in that case. But here, we do actually have a reasonable amount of people on screen. So we have quite a lot of extras, quite a lot of kind of like smaller roles here to actually make it feel like you have, certainly a larger kind of group of people here. And then again, on top of that, and again, for an Asylum picture, the production value here actually looks a shade better than the vast majority of the Asylum pictures. I mean, we get a lot of it on green screen, but even so, I think if you're happy to watch a kind of a lower budget movie, I don't think the actual kind of the design here is all that bad. I mean, it kind of looks like, again, it's not really bobbing around. You can, clearly it's obviously not at sea, but you can kind of just like suspend your disbelief somewhat and kind of, okay, you can kind of accept this is a low budget film that's taking place on a kind of a boat, and, they've got like a few different kind of locations, a few different rooms and things that they're talking to, and and have sort of scenes in and stuff like that to kind of give it a little bit more variety and things like that. There's even some reasonable kind of, again, for an Asylum movie, of special effects, VFX, computer generated, kind of ghostly effects. But I actually still kind of quite like them. I think some of them do actually look quite affecting. And there was actually some nice sequences where we see the kind of the ghosts of the the original kind of Titanic passengers just kind of like walking around sort of silently and things like that, kind of doing their things. And there's one sequence where I think it does look legitimately pretty spooky when we have this kind of violin player. I thought that was quite a good sequence, to be honest. We do have a little bit what I feel is a higher quality and certainly more of the kind of like the effects stuff on screen here. Asylum movies tend to kind of like pad out the running time with just conversations in rooms, I always call it. They don't want to spend the money on having these effects heavy kind of sequences, so they pad out the running time with dialogue scenes that are in an enclosed room, and that is somewhat true of this film. But I would say there's more shots here with VFX than the majority of Asylum films that I've kind of watched. And I have to say, albeit it's a kind of a cheesy plot, and you kind of pretty much guess what's happened, it's an intriguing one, and what I think makes this one a little bit more interesting, there's no real central character. It actually focuses on a few different people. We have the kind of the captain of this ship. We've got this guy played by Bamber, who is like this art collector. We've got the kind of Anna McCord's character and her husband, who are the kind of the social media influencers. Joseph Gatt's character is like the security guy. A couple of other kind of like speaking line parts as well. So more of an ensemble word. So you don't kind of quite know who's going to maybe make it or who isn't and stuff like that. Who's going to kind of live. So that, again, a little bit more interesting. Acting, a mixed bag. Even I think some of the more established actors aren't maybe the best. I think the role of the captain is probably the most believable, I would say. I think it's just the best job here. Keisha Sharp. But there's a couple of acting, which again, Jamie Bamber I think was okay, But let's talk about what doesn't work, and let's just stay with the acting for the minute, because there are some performances here that are, let's say, mixed, and there's one which is cringe-inducing acting, unfortunately, to the degree of like some of the kind of the classics, shall we say. It's kind of it's embarrassing even watching the scenes with this particular kind of performer, shall we say. The acting is a mixed bag. I'm not going to pretend. It is clearly they haven't had a lot of takes. They haven't had a lot of prep time. They clearly haven't done much in the way of kind of rehearsals and things like this. You can just tell, but the kind of the line delivery here, it's more or less one take, kind of move on I would say, for the vast majority of the kind of the sequences. Story-wise, I don't quite know if it makes sense, to be honest with you. We have a kind of a prologue at the beginning of the movie that kind of indicates that there's something already kind of supernatural happening at the kind of the disaster site of the original Titanic. But then we kind of see Lydia Hurst's character summoning kind of the ghosts for this kind of like the modern era, which is the bulk of the film. But you think, well, why is she summoning? Because it looks like there's already kind of like supernatural stuff. It doesn't kind of make sense, and you don't really know why she's doing it. She just kind of says, "Oh yeah, I had voices on my head telling me I'm going to do it," and that's kind of it. So yeah, again, it's kind of like I don't really know what the end game was there. And then it's a stowaway, and it's not like this is just like a commercial cruise. There's no real reason for her to stow away. She could have just bought a ticket. You know, so it's kind of like, why is she even stowing away? She's not like bringing in any sort of contraband or anything like that. So there's just some silliness. So she'd probably expect with a kind of an asylum picture. So, you know, there's no security on this ship. I mean, people just like walk into rooms when they're not supposed to. They're picking up priceless artifacts without any type of security around. It's very, very silly. The cheapness does show through. Even though this movie, I would say, production-wise, is actually, for an Asylum level movie, as I kept saying, is better. It's still undoubtedly a very kind of cheap-looking film. And those of you who maybe are not used to watching kind of cheap fare will kind of be put off by just the kind of the general kind of like cheapness of the movie. Although, again, I'll emphasise this movie, I think, is of generally a better quality than the majority of Asylum movies. I think it was a little bit of a missed opportunity to make this actually genuinely creepy movie, because I do think they've got some of the kind of the basics right in regards to these kind of like these ghosts. There's when we have like scenes that are on the deck that are out, you know, meant to be outside. I've got to say it could have been genuinely creepy at times, and it almost gets there a few times, but I think the quick cuts. I think the music is not particularly helpful in this movie, and just the kind of the lack of building any real atmosphere and tension in this movie. It doesn't really ever become like spooky, which is a shame, because I think this movie nearly had it. I think it could have nearly been a legitimately kind of spooky film. Because you can the visuals of these ghosts, albeit they're kind of a little bit computer generated, I actually got to say they kind of look pretty good. If you've ever seen the movie Dead Birds, it kind of looks a lot like that. But it doesn't quite get there. It's just undercut, I think, by kind of the film's rushed production. Unfortunately, whilst had they just taken a little bit more time and kind of built up the atmosphere, you could have had some affecting scenes here, but it unfortunately doesn't quite ever get there. And as I've kind of mentioned, the effects are very kind of obvious screen, very kind of obvious, you know, drop-in effects and things like that. You know, the CGI is pretty apparent. Again, I personally am a little more forgiving with that sort of thing, because I appreciate this is a low-budget production, but obviously those of you who don't like CGI effects will be put off by the clearly CGI effects. Okay, so what do we think about the actual film then? As I've mentioned and I've alluded to, I do think this is actually not a bad film. And I'll prefix this by saying it's not a bad film if you can accept lower budget films. It does have enough going on, I think, to warrant a look. Obviously, the fact that Joseph Gatt has been arrested for being a nonce, I think, may not help this movie. The whole thing of Annalyn McCord is embarrassing, but maybe it won't put people off. Joseph Gatt, on the other hand, that may well do. But that aside, and I'm not going to kind of put that in as any black mark against this movie, because this was obviously made before that happened. So it's actually a reasonably watchable film. It does slow, I've got to say, in the latter half of the film, and I think that the lack of like really genuinely creepy moments, the lack of atmosphere, and the kind of the Asylum is always having to kind of have lots of conversations in rooms. You know, even though this one does have maybe more effect shots than a lot of Asylum films, it's still there, and I think it gets worse as the film goes on. But it's still actually fairly watchable. I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10, which is an average score. I actually think if you are happy to watch a low budget movie, or if you like Asylum movies, you'll actually probably enjoy this one to a degree, but obviously expectations in check. Who knows what it'll do for the Titanic 4, So a 5 out of 10 for me. Will you watch this movie? Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.